Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to talk about what we can do when we find ourselves getting off track. Most of the time when we do, we tend to find ourselves navigating the unknown, unmapped, or unpaved territories of our life's journey, usually in fear. But how can we begin to open our heart and find ways that we can do this without doing it particularly that way, but something more through love and through opening the heart center? On the program today, we're joined with Reverend Violet Young as we talk about how we can do this very thing by using your love compass to navigate life. Reverend Violet Young, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Well, good morning, Daniel. What a pleasure to talk with you again.
Now, tell us what's going on here where people usually feel that sense of fear about the unknown when they want to perhaps achieve goals or maybe a relationship, whatever it may be, that we tend to kind of do it, in fear. What kind of limitations that imposes on us?
Well, we act out of our chakra system, and since most people are, in our culture are unaware of that system, we tend to operate in the blind, basically. But the chakra system is set up. First chakra is the first chakra is the center for stability and connection to the ground and grounding and being in command of yourself, in a sense, and feeling safe. And unfortunately, that's also the place where fear gets born because it's your seat of survival. And most people operate from that fear, flight, or fight place. That's our, we have not evolved that far. We're hoping that we have, and we're aiming in that direction. But many of us are so unaware that that's where we operate from. And so when something new happens, we don't necessarily welcome it. We think we're welcoming it, but underlying the welcoming is the fear that either it won't live up to our expectations or we won't live up to its expectations or those kind of thoughts. And that, of course, puts the damper on whether or not you're able to move forward with calmness and clarity. You may be moving forward, but it might be a little jerky.
Now, it's interesting, too, because a lot of times we believe that we want to tackle the unknown with a certain bravado or courage, that we tend to see in maybe perhaps our heroes.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, when you talk about unrealistic expectations, that's probably one of the reasons that we do move in fear, isn't it?
Oh, yes. We have these ideas, and it's not that we're not able to master these things, and it isn't that we're not able to work on getting those things accomplished. It's that they seem, we have these visions of what others have done, and you have to understand that all great things happen in increments. Most of the time, in order to produce something, it takes a bunch of small steps to get there. I remember in the 80s there was a book about success, and it was called something about eating the elephant. And how do you eat an elephant? You eat it in small pieces. And how do you climb a mountain? Well, you don't take one giant step. So a lot of us, in our land of instant gratification, we see all these TV shows. They're either half an hour or an hour long, and in that half an hour or an hour, people accomplish huge amounts of stuff. Yes, but it's TV, or it's a movie. Nobody's paying attention to how many little tiny steps it takes. And so it's easy to get overblown and overextended and overdone and feel defeated even before you start. And when you think about the largesse of a project, then the fear sets in that you won't be able to do it because maybe we don't know all those little steps.
And it's interesting because you take a look at something like a search engine like YouTube and you realize that most searches on there are people trying to find ways to do something.
Yeah.
As though we actually forgot that we can learn how to do these things on our own.
Yes, exactly. It's so true. It's like, all you have to do is start to think about stuff and talk to people that you know a lot of the time. Maybe they have suggestions. But it's true. I mean, when we're confronted with a big issue, we are not necessarily trained in the critical thinking that we need to be able to make a plan. I call it like triage. First you have to assess your situation, and then you triage. You decide what's the most important thing, and then you can treat it. But when we're in a state of fear, we're in a place of panic, and we aren't necessarily sure. And so that's when coming back to your love compass, where you're loving yourself and you're paying attention to what's going on around you, it can make you more clear and give you back your steadiness.
Now, what is it about it that we don't tend to come from that place that often?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the programming that we have and the way we've been treated. And let's face it, the world, to me at least, seems a lot more cruel than it used to be. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's how it's feeling. And maybe it's because the amount of information that we're getting is more, and you get to hear more about where people aren't being kind. But I think that if in our world today we added a giant, and I mean enormous dose of kindness, we would be ever so much further ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It's a radical thought, I know.
Not too much. I think, when we slow down and we start to take a look around ourselves, we realize just how true something like that is.
Well, it's like I look in my daily life. I mean, I'm lucky because I live out in a very small town in a small rural area, and people tend to do things a little slower here. And there's a lot of care, for the most part, in paying attention to the people around us, because there's not like giant hordes of people demanding things. And when you get into the bigger cities, there's more people, there's more needs, there's more everything, there's more traffic. But it's really interesting because of where I am. In the summertime, we're flooded with tourists. And it's really interesting to see the difference in the driving between the tourists who come here and the people who are usually here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always the one who stops and lets everybody go, or motions for the next driver, or I try to be the ambassador of information in the area. If I hear somebody talking about they don't know where something is, I'll offer some information. And I usually get greeted with a tremendous amount of appreciation, because I'm not sure that that's what happens, but that's what I do wherever I go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I request. And if I find places that are doing that behavior and are training their help to be helpful and caring, I make sure that the boss knows how much it's appreciated, so that it can foster more of that. And, there's a few places locally, there's lots of places that have that, but there's a restaurant we go to in Newport, and every time I walk in there, I feel supremely taken care of. If I've had a bad day, I always feel better when I leave, because they've treated me with such niceness, and it's genuine, and they train their help really well, and it's just delightful to be in that environment. And when you leave, you feel uplifted. Mm-hmm. Now, why can't we have that everywhere we go?
Well, okay, that's a very good point when we talk about, let's say, the restaurant experience. Okay, now, we have a couple of things that I think that happen there, where the first one is, because I'm the customer and I'm paying, I'm always right, regardless of my crappy attitude and my disposition that I bring into the place. So there's this feeling of a sense of entitlement, like I am entitled to have things the way exactly that I want them, regardless of the mood that I'm in. Quite frankly, no, the customer isn't always right. And just because you're paying money, you don't deserve to be, entitled to treat people, with this bad mood or whatever it is that you bring into the place.
Correct. Yes.
And the fact that you can fall back and you can actually maybe complain to somebody, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that you, suffer because, I felt that you put me out of place. Things like that really irritate me.
Oh, yeah, believe me, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this particular place, I'm not sure I should mention the name because I'm not sure how much leeway I have to do that. But I go in there, and one day my daughter and I went in for breakfast, or like a late breakfast, early lunch, and we were telling the wait staff what we had been through, and there was a medical thing that we had to deal with in the morning, and my husband was sick, and blah de blah. And the next thing we knew, there was a piece of pie on our plate, on our table, as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Here, have this before you have your breakfast." You know, it was like a brunch. She said, "Enjoy this; it'll make you feel better."
Mm-hmm.
And we're gluten-free people, and it was a gluten-free pie. Now, how nice is that?
Right.
And then later, she brought extra pancakes.
Wow.
And I guess my grandson was with us, and his pancakes looked like Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are things that nobody had to do. It was just a niceness.
Right.
Well, believe me, how appreciative we were, you know, and how much better we felt when we left. And how many times have we eaten there since? A whole bunch. You know, where's my dollar going to go? It's going to go where we feel taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it doesn't take a lot. And what did it cost them? It cost them a slice of pie and a pancake.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know?
Something very simple, exactly.
Something very simple, but done with great kindness, which goes right back to Mother Teresa. We don't always get to do great things. We do many things with great love.
Mm-hmm.
We do small things. And that's how we need to operate in our life. But, you know, we have come to this place where there's so many demands on us, and people don't feel wealthy. There's a lot of people in the world who feel poor. And the thing is that wealth does not come from money. Wealth comes from love. The feeling of wealth comes from a wellspring of love, and you have love to give. So if you have love, you're never poor. Right.
I keep thinking of that, what the Wizard in the Wizard of Oz said. There was something to the effect of, success isn't measured by how much you love, but how much you were loved by others.
So true.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then at the end of the It's a Wonderful Life, you know, where, you know, you're the wealthiest man in the world.
Right.
Because look how many friends you have.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't because you've just given money to those friends. It's that you've treated them with love.
Right.
You know, it's really important that we start, like I said in the article I sent you, we start using our heart eyes with which to look. You know, we become blinded with the levels of pain. I mean, we're constantly bombarded. I mean, I can't bear to watch the news for very long because we're constantly bombarded with horrible things. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you're constantly being bombarded with horrible things, what do people do? They put their covers over their head and they dive underneath and they hide. Mm-hmm. And then they don't operate from a place of largesse. They operate from a place of minimal. You know, if I don't stick my toe out too far, maybe it won't get shot off. And it's you know, in so many places around the world where that's a literal thing, I can understand that. But, you know, on the figurative level, we need to insinuate niceness, kindness, caring, awareness of what others' needs are instead of just being so focused on us. You know, I've always noticed in my life that a lot of the people that have the least are the most generous because they know how important it is. And a lot of people who are the wealthiest are the least generous, and that's because they are so focused on themselves.
You know, but the funny thing about wealth is this. I think there are a tremendous amount of people who actually build wealth. We're talking first generation, who tend to be very charitable, very kind, very open-handed, you know, finding ways to make a difference in their community. I think what you find with that attitude of selfishness and wealth comes from people who have been able to stand by, who haven't had the responsibility of building that wealth. You know, sort of the golden spoon, if you will.
Yeah,
and there's
true.
A tremendous difference there. I mean, you can almost tell you're somebody who has had wealth given to you. You kind of married into it, or whatever the case is. You haven't had any responsibility in building it, because I think a fair amount of time, someone who builds wealth tends to realize I didn't do this on my own. It took a lot of people to get me to where I'm at, so there tends to be more gratitude from someone who earns it, who has built it, versus someone who just happens to come by it.
Yeah, that probably is very true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, my family I come from a family of immigrants. My father emigrated to the United States in 1912.
Wow.
From Russia, and my mother's family emigrated from Ireland in around the same time frame. And you know, I didn't know my mother's family because they were pretty much gone by the time I was born, but I grew up with my aunts and from my father's side of the family. And my favorite aunt and uncle, my uncle was a peddler in the summer, so he sold fruit and vegetables, and in the winter he was a junk collector and would collect metal and things like that and sell it. And my aunt was a queen when it came to turning a sow's ear into a silk purse. They always lived in apartments. They were small apartments. She did all of her own. She did everything in the bathtub. She did all of the laundry in the bathtub, and we're talking my uncle's dungarees and everything. And she never used a washing machine in her life. Everything was done from scratch, and she always had time and a desire to offer to others. So if you came to her house, you never left hungry, and you never left empty-handed. No matter what, you left with something in your hand, a bag of fruit, a cake, cookies, who knows, but you never left empty-handed. And they would give you the shirt off their back. My other aunt had more money, and she was always the one who was the more miserly. When I was a kid, there were these special cookies, and you could buy them individually. They were 2 cents for the plain ones and 3 cents for the ones with sugar. And my poor aunt would always buy the ones with the sugar, and my rich aunt would always buy the plain ones.
Sounds like an interesting book, Rich Aunt, Poor Aunt.
Yeah, exactly.
And the differences in gratitude and gifting.
It was really interesting. I always felt that Auntie Annie was the wealthy one, although she lived in places that wouldn't be considered that way. And it taught me well that no matter what you have, you can share.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up that way. I grew up sharing, and that's how I live my life now. If I've got it and somebody needs it, I'm willing to share with it. Mm-hmm. There's very few things that I consider so special that are just mine. I have a few things, but mostly, you know, if you need something, just ask me, and I'll see what I can do about providing it.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems interesting, too, when we talk about something like the ability to give, is that all of us have something that we can give. You know, whether it's our time, it doesn't necessarily have to be something material, but it could be. And, you know, a lot of times I find, you know, it's interesting when you see garage sales. Whenever I have something I no longer use, I just find a way to either give it to someone or I donate it somewhere. You know, it's just that simple for me. I don't see any reason to sell something off that I no longer use, even though some people would say, well, you might be able to use the money, because I believe in that universal vacuum effect where as you release or get rid of something, something finds a way to take its place. And I've seen it in action over and over and over that it's got to be a scientific fact.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The fact that we feel, especially in a place like America, at times that we lack abundance, that we feel poor, you know, and you wonder, where does that feeling come from? The idea that you feel that you lack in anything sometimes amazes me.
Well, and it's because, you know, in our country, in this day and age, it's sometimes hard to find work, and people are starving. I mean, I find it hard to believe in a country that has this much wealth that anybody should go to bed hungry. And, you know, I know in our little community here that we're always, I'm a member of a service club that raises money and puts on events to promote health and well-being for groups that need it. And I'm just constantly amazed at how many people are hungry in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I feel myself to be very, very lucky. But, you know, we live kind of close to the bone.
Right.
There's no, we don't have giant trust funds supporting us. And, you know, when you get to that place, it can be very frightening. You know, I have friends that are close to living on the street because they don't have a steady enough income, and there are landlords who are not understanding. And one woman was almost homeless because she had to go to her father's funeral, and she used some of her rent money, and the landlord wasn't willing to like cut her some slack. Eventually he did, but geez, you know, give somebody a break. They're
Right.
going to pay the rent. It's not like not like they're not invested in living there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but sometimes these things happen where you have to go somewhere, like to a funeral for your father.
Now, let's take a look at that realistically, Violet, from the landlord's point of view.
Oh, yes.
Hey, look, you know, it isn't personal, it's just business.
Oh, yes.
You got to love somebody who opens their mouth and says something that to me is that stupid.
Well, as I wrote in my thing, that is probably the sentence that has done this country or everywhere in. It's not personal, it's business. Because guess what? Everything is personal.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is.
I was just thinking of a movie, Up in the Air, with George Clooney.
I haven't seen that.
It's an interesting movie because what he is a man who works in a company whose job is, as he says, to go out and do what the spineless CEO of a company is unwilling to do, which is to fire employees. That's what his job is to go out and to fire people, to let people go. Okay?
Oh, God.
But what he says is that because there's this young gal that comes up, just freshly graduated out of the university, and she has a way to innovate what it is they do, so they're not out traveling and sitting in front of people to do this. They're going to do it by computer. You know, do it online. You're going to actually have this person sit in front of the computer.
You mean like Skype?
Like a Skype, and you're going to let them go.
Oh, God.
And he says, well, before you start renovating what it is I do, I think you should understand what it is that I do. You know, and she had that sort of attitude, that sort of flippant attitude as she was trying to renovate the system by simply saying, you know, this isn't anything personal. And his attitude is, are you kidding me? This is probably the most personal thing you're ever going to do. I mean, think about it. So she actually goes out on the road with him and realizes what he does is he makes the abyss, so to speak, bearable. Because there's a certain way that he goes about letting these people go, a certain grace, you know, that has to happen, that people should be able to, you know, I mean, think about it. You get fired from a job. It's as a friend of mine said, you know, the toughest part of being fired from a job is that drive home.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that someone like a George Clooney in this movie makes the abyss bearable. In other words, he's leaving you feeling encouraged that, yeah, this really stinks, but there is hope. You know, there's possibility in taking these next steps, and we're going to show you how to do that.
Uh-huh. Well, you know, it's like the whole concept of everything is personal. You know, was brought home in the Erin Brockovich movie.
Right.
Where, you know, she's sick and she's in the office and he's making this deal with the big attorney, Peter Coyote, that he's going to take this thing over. And she's trying to explain to her boss exactly how personal this job is to her and how much of her sweat and tears have gone into it. And she's invested in her work. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that aren't invested in their work, and I know that there's a lot of people doing the job because they have to do the job to make the money. And it would be really great if all of us could just appreciate the fact that we're doing whatever we're doing and like it well enough to do the best job we can. A lot of people don't have that attitude.
They have more of an attitude of entitlement, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I know, you know, but the truth is that, you know, to practice the attitude of gratitude wherever you are and realize that in this job market, we should be happy that we have one, but even if we're not happy with the job, we should be happy that we have a job.
Mm-hmm.
But then, to make the best of that job means you have to make it personal. And, I recognize, one of the things that I said in the article I sent you was that business is still a reflection on who we are and what we do in our lives every day in small and large ways that has a major impact on us. And it's like, what if, here's a radical thought, what if the people that were working in corporations and businesses that have the it's not personal, it's business attitude stop carrying out the rules?
Right.
And start enforcing, in a certain sense, the corporate mindset to recognize that we're not just playing with pawns, we're playing with people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much of this that's systemic that needs to be brought to the surface and cleared out and help people to be nicer. I know I sound like a Pollyanna, but I've always been the Pollyanna.
It's really fascinating that you bring that up, Violet, is because I know there was a television show, I don't know if it's still on, but it was called Undercover Boss.
Okay.
And what happens is a boss goes undercover in his own company.
How can you do that?
As an employee, and works basically in all of the various areas of his company to get a feel for what's going on. And what happens is by the end of the show, because he works closely, let's say it could be a place that makes tacos, like a taco chain,
Uh-huh.
So he's down there and he's doing the counter service, or he's in the back making the tacos, or maybe out on the road doing promotions with another employee whose responsibility is to go out and drum up new business by showing that they do catering, whatever the case is. And then at the end, as he's getting to know these people on a personal level, like what you're talking about, he begins to say, I really love, the dedication that I see to your job, and this is what I would like to do for you. And this is a show that at times can bring tears to your eyes because you realize that, I'm going to give you $20,000 because I'd like to see you get that education to get yourself sharper in this area. I'd like to, do this and this and this. I know that you're having problems with maybe, a family member who needs this, maybe it's an operation, whatever the case is. And you see all of this gratitude being put on to these employees, these various people.
It had never been put on before because the guy was sitting in his ivory tower and he had no idea what it was really like. Yes,
it could be, and it just seems to be really interesting, how it becomes very personal, like what you're talking about. But it isn't about the money; it's that somebody comes to appreciate that you actually have spent the time, to give yourself, even though you're getting paid. It's easy to take that for granted that, well, I'm paying you, why should I, be grateful that you're here? But how different that really is. I know whenever I was a supervisor, that was exactly how I was with my subordinates. Finding those little things that you could do to let them know, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate you and the efforts that you make. And you would be amazed. It isn't about giving anybody more money. It's just that simple act that creates tremendous motivation.
Well, it's like the act of recognition. There was a poll done, many, many years ago, that it isn't so much that employees wanted raises, not that everybody doesn't want some more money, but the fact is that most of them felt completely unacknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked at places that you would think would be conscious of this. And I remember even having a sit-down with a new boss of a product line of a publication I was working with. And I explained to them what was really important. And she didn't pay attention. And she took us for granted. And, I was just amazed that she was running a publication that was aimed in a certain direction of lightness and awareness and consciousness, and she couldn't act that way herself. And it was like, it was going to cost you how much to send once in a while, as a niceness, you send your employee a gift card for $20 to Fred Meyer's.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that cost? Or a note that says, gee, I saw that you did this, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
How much, it's like I do readings with stones and crystals. I work out of a little store in Newport once a month. I have clients who come in. I've never met these people before. I get their name, address, and phone from my records. We do a reading with these people. I mean, they come in, they trust me to do this reading with them. And as soon as they've left, depending on how busy I am, as soon as they've left, I have a selection of note cards in my bag, and I write them a thank you note.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the automatic thing I do. Why is that? Because I want to appreciate them for taking the risk to communicate with somebody that's a stranger to them, and I want to appreciate the fact that they trusted me with their innermost thoughts. How hard is that? It cost me, 50 cents for a stamp? Whoop-de-doo. It's just a nice thought. I had some lady call me the other day that got my note, and she said, "Oh, my God, thank you so much." I mean, how many notes does she get? Probably not too many.
Especially notes that are actually written by hand.
Oh yeah, well I'm a big hand writer. I like writing things by hand. I will send emails and stuff, but the truth is that there's nothing like a handwritten note to show that you actually were aware enough of what you were doing that wasn't generated as opposed to written. And even if I screw up and I have to scratch something out.
Now, how do we start to, Violet, pay attention to this love compass as you talk about so that it can begin guiding us in a better way? Sometimes we just kind of maybe get caught up in life and in ourselves and our own things here, and we forget about what's around us that's important. How do we develop that love compass or get back on track?
Well, I make reference to the Pinocchio movie with Jiminy Cricket, and I remember that movie very well. I don't remember all of the movie, but I remember the comfort of the Jiminy character. And I have always carried that thought in my head, in my heart. It's like, think about the nice things that someone else has done for you when they didn't have to. And build on that and recognize every time you're in a situation, you're in a bank, you're in a post office, you're in the supermarket, you're in your vehicle, you're driving, and somebody wants to get in line, how hard is it to let them instead of cut them off? How hard is it to wave at somebody on the street when you go by and smile at them instead of pretending that you're in a vehicle that has no windows?
Mm-hmm.
How hard is it? It's like when I go to a restaurant or someplace and there's little kids, they will often make eye contact with me and they'll wave and I'll wave back. And I've had some really lovely encounters with little kids across a room where I wave at them and then they wave at me, or they wave at me and I wave back, and we play peekaboo. And it's just delightful to connect with people that way. How expensive is that? It costs you nothing, but it makes you feel good. And a collection of those feel-good moments can start to turn on the compass.
Right.
This is not rocket science. This is so basic. It's so simple. It's so easy to just recognize, how do I feel when someone treats me extra nice? How is it when I walk into a place and somebody says, "Good morning, how are you?" And they seem interested, and it isn't just, "Good morning, how are you?" With a little more life to their voice. And how well do you feel cared for? I mean, like that restaurant we go to in Newport. I mean, we walk in there, and they greet you, and they seat you, and they bring you stuff, and they ask after you, and they actually spend a couple of minutes listening to you. If I say, "Gee, I've had a really difficult medical emergency this week," and they come around and they chat with you, and a lot of times they'll remember, "How's your husband?" Come in there 2 or 3 times, and they're like, "How's your hubby doing?" Wow, what a wonderful feeling to feel that somebody gives a ding-dong.
Right.
It's not hard. You can smile at people, you can wave at people, you can let somebody get in front of you in line, you can answer somebody's question, you can pick something up that fell down for someone, you can help somebody who needs to. I'm short, so I'm always looking for the tall arm person to get me the thing on the shelf. And one of the things that I notice, Daniel, a lot is that when you ask, there's this idea that we should all be able to do everything ourselves. We need to be in command, in power of ourselves, and we should take care of ourselves.
Or the attitude of the self-made man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah,
sure.
yeah. So, I'm short. Now, there's no way in God's little green earth that my arms are going to grow between now and the time I need that product off the shelf. And I will stand there and go, oh, my God, now if there's a tall guy anywhere around, let's see if he'd be willing to get it for me. Now, what that does is it gives me humility because I have to ask, or else I don't get what I need. But what it does for the other person is it gives them an opportunity to be nice. I have not yet had the situation where I've said, excuse me, would you be willing to get that down from the shelf for me? That I've ever had anybody say no to me. They always are happy to help me. And when they do, I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And oftentimes they'll say, oh, it was my pleasure. And then they leave with a smile on their face because they have done something nice for someone else. And you know what? It feels good to do something nice for someone else. Mm-hmm. And that is creating the love compass in reactivation. Mm-hmm. Because when you start to do that, you are creating an opportunity for people to give of themselves. And does it cost anything for them to lift something or pick something up or get something down? No. It's an easy, nice thing to do. I always appreciate it if somebody does that for me, and I'm always happy to do it for someone else.
Now, I was going to say or ask you, because we have just a short bit of time left, is there a way people can find out more about your work or how they can contact you?
Well, they can call me at 541-547-4664. We are putting on the 18th Annual Pathways to Transformation Holistic Health, Psychic, and Crafts Fair in Yachats on August 2nd and 3rd. And you can learn more about that by going to chucklingcherubs.com. There's a program on the website. It's an 8-page program, and actually the article that I refer to during this chat with you is on there. It's called Using Your Love Compass to Navigate Life. And if people came to that, they would connect deeply with about 70 different exhibitors from all over the Pacific Northwest and beyond, and get a lot of new information. But, anybody that wants to learn about turning on your love compass, you can call me. Because guess what? I love to talk about it. Because you know what? It's how I live my life. And so far, in the 64 years, this has basically been myself. I sat down and wrote this because I'm realizing that not everybody is brought up that way. And perhaps we need to go back to Jiminy Cricket and find our conscience. Being
Pollyanna isn't such a bad thing, is it?
No, well, it served me well, and the few times, I'm 64, so I've been around the block, 2 or 3 times. The one thing I've noticed is that when I stray off my own path, and I have, that it's very uncomfortable for me, and I come back pretty quickly, and now I just am on the path. And I always try to remember the Jiminy Cricket character, and that's my conscience. It's your conscience. It's telling you what to do. We just have to be quiet enough to pay attention. How hard is that? Well, it doesn't have to be difficult. It can be really easy. Remember it when somebody does something nice for you, how nice it feels. And then just take that and pay it forward. And just keep doing that. And eventually you'll be on the right path. Mm-hmm. I know, it's like so simple. But, we can choose to do that. You take the needs of others into consideration when you're making a decision. I do that with everything. Mm-hmm. So, that's just how I try to live my life. And when you stop being so self-centered, the energy of fear goes away because you realize you're not alone. That fear comes from feeling like you're alone, but you're never alone.
Agreed. Violet, could you give out that website one more time?
Oh, sure. chucklingcherubs.com.
chucklingcherubs.com, the place to find out how you can begin to open your heart center. And just simply, as you said earlier in the program, smile the next time you see somebody. Offer to help next time you see that somebody needs help. Don't just wait to be asked. Just simply jump in and do the thing because it needs to be done. Violet, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
And Daniel, it's always a pleasure.
Thank
and
you.
Continue your really, 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 really important work.
We will do. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
All righty. Thank you so much.
We
Bye-bye.
want to thank you, the listeners out there. Begin to open up your heart center and share the love with everyone around you. I'm Daniel Davis. Again, thank you for joining us here on the program today. You can find out more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com, the number 50. Thank you again for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.